Hey everyone, I'm Raji. I'm a product designer at Figma, and I want to talk about our newest effect, the glass effect. We're gonna have a lot of fun examples to go through, kind of push it in some different fun ways. But what is it? Well, first of all, we can kind of see a little bit about what it looks like here. But let's start off by doing the simple thing. Let's just apply our first glass effect. I'm calling this one Baby's First Glass. One thing to know about the glass effect is that you're going to need to apply it to a frame. Right now we support only frames. We'll see what happens in the future. But with a frame object here, I've got this auto layout menu with some icons on it, probably something that you would use in an iOS app design. We're just going to put it over this fun wave background to start with, and we're going to add our first effect. We're going to hit the plus button, and we're going to change this to the glass effect. Now in the glass effect, you're going to see a lot of different options, and we're only going to demo a few right now. We're going to move on and break down each one. But you'll see that we've got a few things. We've got a light for a lighting angle. We have the angle here. It's also pretty fun. We can actually change the lighting angle. We have refraction, depth, dispersion, and frost. And we can see right here over this wavy background that we're able to change. It looks very like it's warping the background. So if I change this here, like refraction, you'll notice that it looks like it's just like sitting on the background, but as we change refraction, it sort of bends everything. So that's your first glass effect. We have some good defaults there. If you just add glass, it should just work right out of the box. But let's talk about each detail in each setting for each one. So first, let's talk about light. If I zoom in here, you'll notice that we have a lighting angle that's shooting down. This is going to be a 45-degree angle. And if I click on the object here where the glass is, this little circular frame, you'll see that the lighting is at 45 degrees. I can actually just drag. This is one of my most fun things to do. You can just drag this thing around. You'll see that the lighting kind of changes, and our little icon here is indicating where the lighting is changing to. Now, a little secret hack for you. If you hold Shift, you can actually constrain to 45-degree increments if you're like that and you like to keep things exactly on 45-degree increments. The other thing that we can do with light is we see that it's pretty intense. The light is pretty bright white, but if we actually just drag this down, little tip, you hover over the intensity and you can drag it right down. And at this point, we've basically just created nothing. So you can see here how the lighting works. Moving on to the next one. Let's talk a little bit about refraction. We'll come into this glass effect here, and we can see that refraction's all the way up, and you can see how much it's bending the shapes underneath it. So if I actually pull this all the way down, we'll see that once again, it looks kind of like a normal frame with maybe like an inner shadow, a drop shadow, and that's about it. And you'll see that we have a drop shadow applied here. So if we take this off, at this point, we've just got just a little bit of glassiness. But if we bring that refraction way up, we'll see how it takes in the elements underneath it and actually bends them behind the glass. Let's talk about the next one, depth. A key thing to know about depth is if I actually take the refraction all the way down, depth doesn't do a lot. It does a little bit. You can see a little bit of sort of the shadowing and things like that as if it's a curved piece of glass. But really what I would encourage you to do is take refraction and depth and work them together. Really, as you slide them up and down, they influence each other. So depth will change the actual depth of the glass here. And once we refract, we can do a lot of things there. So depth is super cool. Now frost, it's a new name, but for you all, this really is like background blur. And this is the ability to sort of obfuscate or blur elements behind it. So say we bring that refraction way up, like we had before, and that depth way up. But if we frost that out, you'll see that it actually begins to obscure and blur out the elements behind it. So just remember that frost is a lot like blur. And we're going to show you reasons why you might use frost in the future. Now, dispersion. One thing that you may notice about this is all of a sudden there's a lot of different colors going on here. A lot of people call this something like chromatic aberration, and it's going to bring in those rainbowy tones. Like if you show light through like a prism, you're going to see here that dispersion will actually, if you bring it all the way down to 0, everything looks black and white behind this because it's just a white interface with black text. But if I bring it all the way up, now we get all those sort of rainbow tones. We're getting those blues, we're getting a little bit of reds, and as we begin to drag this around, and I would highly encourage doing this, drag this thing around, see how it works, because if I just have this over a white surface here, it's not gonna work as well. I'm not gonna see the effects. And that's something across the glass effect is you're always gonna wanna test it out on top of some background elements, background UI, to see how it behaves. This one's my favorite. It's super cool and it looks really funky. All right, so like I said earlier, you're gonna wanna test out how the glass effect works across a lot of different interfaces or different backgrounds. For instance, if you're designing for iOS, you're gonna wanna think about like, well, if this is a menu bar on the bottom, and as you have things scroll past it, like what kinds of things would scroll past it? Would they be UI elements, card elements? Is it a map? Is it like, what is it? Is it just imagery? Is it a video? And we'll talk through a lot of those different examples. But in Apple's version of Liquid Glass, they use glass for almost all kinds of elements. So we're thinking about menu items, like context menu items, the copy paste menu, things like that. So we're gonna do a little bit of a test with this. Now, I've already set up a component, and this is one of my favorite ways to test. I've got a component here, and I've already got glass applied to it right here. And then I have this instances of this component actually copied over against each one of these. So now I can simultaneously see how it will behave against different UI. And in these cases, just different kinds of images. And in this case over here, we're thinking about like, well, what happens if like maybe card views go by this thing? Maybe it's a very minimal interface. So I'm gonna go back into the glass settings and we can play with a lot of different things here. So once again, I can play with the depth and we can see like how distracting do we want this to be? Maybe we want the frost to be a little bit up, so we actually want to frost it just a bit. Once again, really good way to test all this stuff is just seeing this with a bunch of different instances and then playing with like lighting and things like this. Now, lighting, it's fun in Figma to do this. In iOS, in Apple's Liquid Glass, lighting sort of gets affected by the way you tilt your phone. So we could do this to simulate this if we wanted to in Figma by just changing the lighting to let our developers know, hey, this is sort of gonna respond like this. And also, of course, you can preview this stuff. Now, we can change depth, all those sorts of things. Now, this is an effect that's most fun when you actually just play with this. So I'm not gonna try to teach you a lot. I'm just gonna try to show you, hey, this is where it's at, and then just play with it. I think that's the most fun. Now, here's a good example here where you might have a context menu that has a bunch of text and you wanna see how this glass, maybe you want a custom menu that you're building for your app. And in this case, I've noticed a problem. We've got this menu and it's got cut, copy and paste and delete, but with this current glass setting, it looks cool, but it's also not very readable. The text is really obfuscating this interface, doesn't seem very accessible. It's actually pretty distracting. So with this sort of a situation, what I might do is just bump up that frost. Now you can bump it all the way up and you just have frosted glass, or you can actually bump it back and see like, this may be more of the setting that I would want, kind of figure out what feels right for your interface. And of course, here's another example here. We've got some glass here. And with this glass, we want to see how this may play against like an audio interface. So once again, we can see like maybe we need more frosting or less frosting there. Maybe we need more or less refraction or more or less depth here, just to feel out how exactly this may look against this kind of an interface. So all good ways to kind of test things out. I came up with this kind of fictitious color pickers. I'm in love with color pickers, mostly because they have a ton of color. But this is a super fun way to think about like, well, what if we had an app that might change the background color or like tint the background color, and you had a sheet that slid up and that sheet actually allowed you to choose a color. Well, we could actually have maybe a loop, as they call them, that allowed you to kind of feel this out and choose a different color. Now, right now I haven't hooked this up to a prototype, but what I have done is I can actually see how this may behave on the edges. Now, of course, this is what I really love about this effect is that on the edges, we're gonna get all this like fun funkiness here, but we can also see same exact thing with our glass effect, like how's this thing gonna work? Like, do we wanna drop shadow? Do we wanna tint it? Maybe we want to tint it a little bit. And so a little bit about tinting, if you wanna bring in a different colored glass, what we've done before is we've worked with a lot of clear glass, but what if we wanna like tinted to make it stand more off the background. So in this case, we can actually see that we have a little bit of a fill here to tint this. And I can actually bump this up here. I've actually taken this fill and put a blend mode on it here of overlay, so it actually draws from the color underneath it. And so in this case, maybe I just want this to stand off just a little bit, like a little bit of a tint. Also with this one, maybe I want this to have a tint as well. So in this case, what I did is I got a little bit more creative. I took glass, here's the normal glass appearance, and I actually added a radial gradient on there because I wanted it to stand off a little bit more off of this background. So all really fun things that you can do. You can intermix different effects with your glass. You can intermix different fills with your glass to create different kinds of tints. So definitely encourage you to get creative with this and create the best kind of interfaces that you can. Here's just a couple of examples of what we've done here. Like maybe this is a music player that we're creating. Maybe we're like a music app. And so we wanted to make sure that this little music player that came up, maybe this is for macOS, we wanted it to be able to like really frost out the stuff in the background because we didn't want any busy backgrounds to be there. And once again, this is all working on a frame element, just to let you know. Another thing to keep in mind that when you have glass applied to something, currently, you're only going to be able to have one corner radius. So what if you wanted like varying corner radiuses? You're not going to be able to do this. And you may go in and be like, oh, I'd like to put in like 32. And then I want to like change the individual corner radiuses. When you have glass on this, it only works with the same corner radiuses. So once I turn off or take away glass, you'll notice that I can actually come in now and edit all of those individually. So just a little something to note about Figma's current version of glass, which is in beta. We'll be having some improvements and adjustments to it as we move along. All right, this is where it gets really fun. Let's talk about glass in prototypes. Probably as you know, like glass really looks great when things are moving underneath it. And in a UI world, what we're looking at is UI moving underneath it or a movie moving underneath it. So what we see here is I've got a couple of different glass elements. One up here, I've got this button here, and I've added a few other things to it. I've added some glass to it. Keep in mind also I've styled like the icon inside of it because I wanted it to have a little interior like lighting and gradients in it, just give it that extra pop. And then also this glass here, if I turn it off and on, you can kind of see I've got a border on that as well. So I'm really adding a lot of different things to this glass to give it the appearance that I want. Now in this case, you don't see much because it's actually not over anything, but we've got one glass element there for our button. And then the next element that we have right here is like our little player element. Now, I'm not gonna bore you with all the details here, but let's just check it out. So I'm gonna take this scroll view and I'm gonna hit Shift Space. Hitting Shift Space is gonna bring up my inline prototype viewer. And this is a great way to test it. We can see how our glass is really working. Now, in this case, it's kind of interesting, like kind of just looks like a background blur. The glass doesn't really do too much. So what I'd like to do here is come in, take this glass and see what I've got. I don't have a lot of refraction. That kind of makes sense. That's why it just looks a little bit like frosted glass. So I'm gonna refract this a bit and I'm gonna bring the depth up here and I'm gonna bring my frost down just a little bit. Now, notice as I bring my frost down, it gets really visually noisy, a little bit more inaccessible. So I'm definitely gonna keep that up here and crank my dispersion up here. Frost maybe just a little bit less. And so now as I scroll through, I can see how things change. And especially if I go over this text, you can see how the sort of refraction and the depth are working together here. So that's super cool, works in prototypes. Let's move along. Let's talk about interactive components. So in this case, I just set up kind of a default what looks like apples toggles. And what I did is I created two components. I've got a switch component here. And if I go over to the prototype area, I'm gonna be able to see that I've got a couple of events here. And I'm not gonna teach you how to set up all these prototypes, but basically this is my start state, this is my end state. And what I'm doing is when you click on this or you drag on this, it's going to go to this other state. So that way I can create the drag interaction, but I can also just have like when you tap it, it'll actually move and smart animate over to this. And also same thing on the return. I have a drag and click interaction handler and it's gonna take me back, smart animate back to the original state. Now what's cool about this is I also have another nested component in here that's called a switch toggle. and it has a couple of interactions within it. So we got our interactions on interactions. It's gonna be great. And so when I press this, I actually want it to kind of smart animate to this like big glassy state. And so let's check this out. This is embedded in this, and now I'm gonna take these switches and put them within here. So first off, we can see when we click on the target here, we're gonna be able to just move it over like this. So that's great, super smooth. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. But if I hold, you'll notice that we get that sort of a liquid glass looking, like Apple's toggles, where we can see like when we're holding the thing down, it's kind of fun. It's a little bit like a UI fidget where you fidget with it and it's super fun. But when you're just smart animating, when you're just tapping, it works just how you should. So remember, you can embed glass inside of these things. Also keep in mind, right now they work on frames. And so I used frames with no content in it, no auto layout. I just used a frame within here, and I can show you what this looks like. We've got a button frame here, go to the design, and I can see here that I've got a little bit of glass with these settings. Also, I added a drop shadow because I wanted it when you tap it for it to kind of lift off the interface. Great, so there's interactive components. Let's move along. We're gonna go with a really cool example of like video. Now this is a little bit fictitious. It's not something we would necessarily want, but it's a really great way to test out glass. What I've done with this prototype is I've actually just set up a little frame with a bunch of glass settings on it. And I've said while you're hovering, go to this one. And of course, with this one, it'll go back as soon as you're done hovering. So I am going to hit shift space on this, and we're just gonna feel it out. Now what's great about this is that I can actually see how the glass is going to interact. Imagine this isn't just a rectangle or just a frame, that this is actually like a bit of UI. So you tap on something, it opens up UI, and you can actually choose from a menu or something like that. So we can see how this actually might interplay. Let's say you're creating a video player, how it may interplay with sort of interactions as it resizes and all that. And a couple of fun examples too. I've set up a search field. I've set up a couple of other elements with glass. This here is a sheet that has glass, a bunch of frost and different things on it. And I've just set up a prototype for that. So I've set up a prototype for searching places. When you click this, it's going to bring you to this other screen, but we can actually see how we have glass overlaid here and all of the stuff that you've come to know and love about Figma. For instance, on this frame, I want to go ahead and allow overflow scrolling in both directions. That way I can get a sense for like how this map works. How does this feel when we have this different map image behind it? And how does the glass feel as we scroll around? So let's check it out. We're gonna hit shift space again, our old friend, and we can see here as I scroll around, we can see that this is looking pretty good, but maybe it's a little heavy, right? Like when we get over here and we have a little map pin, that might be a little bit much. Once again, we can move this thing over there. We can come on in and come to our glass setting and say, once again, this may need just a little bit less refraction, but we don't have to go so hog wild on that. And then we can actually put a little bit of frost there just to make sure that this feels good. Now we might want to also change the text on this as well, because the text is getting a little bit washed out here with this placeholder text. In this case, what I might do is actually tint. If we know we're gonna have like a dark map behind it, I'm gonna go into this and maybe tint this a little bit darker and then bump this tint up. So maybe that works for us. Now we can actually see the text a little bit more, and there we go. Maybe I'll do like a dark tint on that. So anyways, a lot of great examples with prototyping. Now, I know that you are all very serious business people and love to create UIs for apps and all that, but sometimes you can just have a little bit of fun. So let's just share a few different examples of like having fun with things. Now, I created these because I felt these were really cool. Apple had them in their announcement about how these sort of things like work. And I feel like you could just use these as like really great UI art and teaser art, and then play with the glass settings on this and just see how it all works. But this is a couple of sliders and a couple of switches. Now, if we get really fun, we can see that we've got this like really cool rainbow. And because glass uses a bunch of frost, so we can actually use that as blur, I can actually take all of these different arches here, and I can turn them off, and you can see that we've got a little bit of blurring behind there, probably from this inner arch here. Oh, nope, not that arch. Probably have a little bit of blurring there for our objects. We probably have these actually with layer blurs on them. You can see they're just a bunch of geometric objects we slammed in the back. So we can blur those out if we'd like, or we can actually just use glass to blur for us as well. So if I turn on glass here, you can see how cool that looks. Glass tends to look really cool from an art perspective when it's over any kind of object that has hard edges on it. And so in this case, you can see how cool this is. Like, I can imagine there's gonna be a lot of really cool art coming out just based off of this glass effect alone. But of course we can play with this, and you can see how quickly you can come up with something that's really wild and cool. Once again, we can see that dispersion effect. If I come here to the edge of this object, you can see that it starts bringing in those like basically blues and like those cyans. You can bring those reds and yellows in there. I love it, so I'm keeping it. And then we can bring that frost up here. So we didn't really need to blur those elements in the back because we're using this frost slider here to be able to do that. And I actually think that's actually really cool. Maybe I'm gonna take off that, I don't want that white background. This is great. You can get really weird with it as well. Maybe you wanted to create an old document, some kind of a book here, and you're gonna use like glass to create a magnifying effect look. And maybe you're gonna pop this on social media, get tons of likes. You know, that's gonna be great. It is fun. It is really fun to play with. In this case of glass, we've actually done an inner shadow. So notice that that was really intense. We saw a lot of that like light coming in. Can't encourage you enough to just play with these things, add different effects into these things. For instance, if you wanted to add our also very new texture effect, you could really get crazy with this. And maybe you wanna like texture this thing up to create more of a frosty looking, icy looking glass. Can't wait to see what you do with it. Like, look at that, that's like this kind of noisy. So yeah, just like throw all the effects at it, have fun with it, especially when you're working within like an art context and you wanted to create like maybe cool graphics for social media, you wanna create cool graphics to your website or whatever. Now keep in mind, speaking of websites, you're not gonna be able to embed this as SVG or anything like this. This is a pretty custom, unique technology. So if you're creating art like this, I would definitely encourage you to export this, like go hog wild with it, but then export it as like a PNG, so you'll be able to keep all of these characteristics that are baked in. And we're gonna do a couple more fun examples here. I created, this is a pretty common habit of mine, but I created a component because I don't like repeating myself a lot. And so I created a component, added all these instances here. And you know, this is definitely far beyond probably the use cases of grid, but I'm using grid to create art. So I'm adding all these things on a grid. What's great about grid is that I can actually like resize this and they're all set to kind of like scale on the grid, which is great. Now I'm gonna take my glass tile that already has glass. I can turn it off. We can kind of see what this looks like. There's a little bit of a radial gradient going on here to give a little extra highlight. Remember, we're thinking art here, but I'll keep that off for now. Looks just like a normal picture. But I'm gonna add glass here, and I'm gonna create maybe like one of those, you know, in the 80s and 70s, they had these really crazy little glass cubes that you would look through and see something. So I'm gonna come in and just play with these settings. Like maybe I want that refraction to be super high, the depth to be a little bit lower, higher, dispersion. I can, of course, just play with this. You'll get a hang of this. Not a fan of that, but we can see with the frost, we can kind of see the depth really come out here, kind of the shape of the glass. So we're gonna take that frost all the way down. Definitely not doing that, but we can also turn that light intensity down if we don't want any of that. So this is looking pretty rad. I do love it. So there, we've created some kind of cool, like glassy looking 1980s style cube glass looking through at a pool. And lastly, I'll just show you another example here. This is like a cool piece of art. It's a little clock. A lot of these things, you know, use basic Figma technologies like shadows and shapes and things like that. But we've created, let's go here and let's figure out where that glass face is. We've created a couple different elements. One is that little viewer that shows the date in it. And if we turn off glass, we can see kind of what it's doing. It's kind of like bending all those objects. So we have a lot of our settings kind of cranked up here on depth and dispersion, maybe refraction. We don't want to refract it too much because we just want to make sure that we just bend it a little bit, but can still show the number. And we can see here that like, that's really cool. And then lastly, let's go find our next piece of glass here. Let's find the layer that I put it on. We can see how different it looks. Here's just a couple of shapes that we slapped into this clock illustration, but if I turn on the glass, we can see that we bended it and warped it towards the edges, and it creates this really dynamic look, really funky clock, really cool. Okay everyone, that's what I've got to share with you on our glass tutorial. Let me end it by sharing a few resources with you to get you going to play around with this stuff. First off, we're gonna have a playground file that's gonna be published to our Figma community, and it's gonna look a little bit like this. At the end of that playground file, you're gonna be able to play with all kinds of these different settings, try out things on your own, but we're also going to have a list of resources. I'm gonna go through those really quick. So first off, if you wanna learn more about this, read the details, and you're a little bit of a nerd like that, you can definitely hop into our help center to learn about all the nitty-gritty on the glass effect. Second, on community, Apple will be publishing an iOS or iPad OS 26 kit. And that's gonna have all of their defaults baked in for the glass effect. So if you're ever wondering like, well, would this look exactly like how it looks in Apple's system? If you just use that kit, they already have all those settings applied for you. So you can use menu bars, things like that right out of the gate and get going with that. And lastly, if you're learning about like how to actually implement some of these things in code, you can actually hit up the Apple Liquid Glass developer documentation to learn more about what's possible when you're actually coding up these interfaces. Thanks so much. I'm Raji. This has been super fun. Hope you have fun with Figma's glass effect.